The first time Laila returned to her hometown after 12 years, the purple blossoms of the jacaranda trees were falling like confetti onto the cracked pavement of her childhood street. It was as if the town had dressed itself in celebration for her arrival, masking the rot beneath the surface. Nothing looked quite the same, yet everything felt painfully familiar: the narrow lane where her mother once sold bangles, the shuttered bakery with its faded sign, the hushed whispers of neighbors behind drawn curtains. Laila wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here to reclaim what had been stolen: her family's honor, her childhood, and the justice denied when she was just a girl. 12 years ago, she had left as a disgraced daughter, blamed for a scandal orchestrated by the most powerful family in the village, the Ranas. Her father had been accused of theft from the Rana estate, a lie spun by Arab Rana, the ambitious eldest son, to cover his embezzlement. The fallout was swift. Her father was jailed, her mother died from shame, and Laila was cast out like a shadow carrying bad luck. The truth had buried itself under layers of wealth, threats, and silence. But Laila hadn't forgotten. She had spent the past decade studying, working, rising. While they had tried to erase her, she had rewritten herself into a force they would never see coming. She stepped through the rusted gate of her old home, now crumbling but still standing a skeleton of memories. Her fingers grazed the doorframe where her height had been etched every year. Inside, dust hung in the air like ghosts. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. This was not defeat. This was the beginning. She would rebuild it all, brick by brick, and turn it into the stage for her vengeance. That afternoon, she walked into the Rana Enterprises headquarters, a towering marble building in the heart of the city, carrying nothing but a briefcase and a name they'd long tried to forget. She was no longer the barefoot daughter of a bangle seller. She was now Dr. Laila Mirza, a legal consultant with degrees from Oxford and a reputation that echoed in boardrooms. Her appointment had been arranged through layers of corporate disguise. She wanted to be face to face with Arab before he realized the trap. Arab Rana entered the conference room with his signature arrogance. He hadn't changed much, still the same smug smile, the same cold eyes. But his hair was grayer, his face puffier, and his name now stained with hushed rumors of failed investments. When their eyes met, he blinked, confused by the familiarity. In her gaze, she extended a hand. Dr. Laila Mirza, I'll be consulting on the inheritance dispute involving your father's estate. His handshake was firm, but there was a flicker in his expression. He didn't recognize her yet, not truly. That was good. She wanted to savor his downfall. For weeks, Laila embedded herself within the company's internal workings under the pretense of legal mediation. She studied ledgers, emails, board decisions. She quietly made allies of disgruntled employees and exposed the cracks in Rana's empire, all while smiling politely in meetings and sipping tea offered by the very people who once laughed as her family was ruined. At night, she returned to her childhood home, repairing the walls and reliving memories, not to mourn them, but to fuel her fire. The second phase of her plan began when she discovered a hidden account in Dubai, one tied to a series of illegal transactions that could unravel the entire Rana legacy. She copied the files, encrypted them, and sent a whisper to the press using an anonymous leak. The story broke within days. Rana Enterprises implicated in international fraud. Panic swept through the company. Shareholders withdrew. News vans camped outside their gates. But the real storm was still gathering. Arab grew paranoid. He held emergency meetings, threatened staff, hired private investigators. Laila watched him unravel with silent satisfaction. Then, one evening, during a crisis management session, she slid a folder across the table toward him. There's something you should see. Inside were photographs of ledgers, bank transfers, offshore accounts, all traced to his personal authorization. His eyes darted from the pages to her face. She leaned forward, her voice calm. You remember me now, don't you? He froze. I'm Laila, daughter of Hafiz Mirza, the girl you tried to erase. The blood drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There were no words, just the sound of his downfall echoing through the silent room. Arab's hands trembled as he flipped through the damning documents. The foundation of his empire was crumbling before his eyes, and the woman responsible sat across from him, calm, composed, and undeniably powerful. His voice cracked. What do you want? Laila smiled faintly, tilting her head. What I want is already in motion. You see, this isn't about money, not anymore. This is about truth, about justice. Her voice hardened. You destroyed my family. My father, an honest man, spent his final years in prison for a crime you committed. My mother died with shame in her heart. You paraded around with their blood on your hands. But now, every lie you told is being peeled back. The silence was suffocating. Arab stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. You think you'll get away with this? I'll bury this scandal. I still have power. Laila stood as well, her posture unwavering. You had power, but it's slipping fast. The media knows. The board knows. Your clients are pulling out. Even your siblings are calling lawyers to protect their shares. You're on your own. Arab's breath was shallow. He reached for his phone, but Laila calmly placed a USB on the table. Before you make another poor decision, you should know this isn't the only copy. If anything happens to me, this data goes public in full, unedited, including names, accounts, all of it. She turned and walked out, her heels echoing against the marble floors like a final verdict. Outside, the skies were overcast, and the jacaranda petals stuck wet to the pavement. She didn't stop to watch him chase her. He wouldn't. He was too busy scrambling to save himself from the hole he'd dug years ago. Layla's next move wasn't just legal, it was personal. She visited the old courthouse where her father had stood trial, a place where justice had once been bought and sold like fruit in the market. But this time, Laila came with a legal team, a press release, and the backing of a major human rights organization. They filed a formal motion to reopen the case of Hafiz Mirza, presenting new evidence, the real evidence of who had orchestrated the theft. The media storm intensified. Images of her father's weathered face and courtroom sketches from years ago were plastered across newspapers, this time not as a criminal, but as a wronged man. People who had once turned away from the Mirza family now bowed their heads in shame. Her story of betrayal, exile, and return spread like wildfire. As the case gathered attention, so did her presence in the town. People began to approach her on the street, offering condolences, support, and apologies. Some tried to pretend they had always believed in her. Laila never forgot their silence, but she accepted their words for what they were, fear cloaked as kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of fire and amethyst, she visited her father's grave. The stone was plain, with only his name and dates etched. She knelt and placed a single jacaranda blossom on the grave. Baba, she whispered, they're going to know the truth now. I'm sorry it took so long. The wind rustled gently, as if answering. Her next step was the Rana estate itself, a sprawling mansion built on lies. It sat atop the hill, its balconies overlooking the entire town like a crown of arrogance. Laila arrived unannounced, wearing a simple white shalwar kameez, her hair tied back, face serene. The guards didn't stop her. They recognized her now, not as a threat, but as a storm that had already passed through. Arab's mother, Begum Rana, answered the door herself. The once regal woman looked tired, the weight of her son's disgrace etched deep into her features. I'm not here for revenge, Laila said softly. Not from you. Begum Rana nodded slowly, her lips trembling. I never believed the lies, she whispered, but I stayed silent, and silence is its own form of violence, Laila replied, but there was no hatred in her tone. Only sorrow. Inside, the mansion was quieter than it had ever been. The servants walked on eggshells. The art on the walls seemed dimmed by shame. Laila stood in the grand foyer, remembering the time her mother had been summoned here like a beggar, forced to kneel and apologize for a crime they didn't commit. The memory stung. But today, it was Laila who stood tall. Where is he? She asked. Begum Rana pointed upstairs. He hasn't left his room in days. Laila didn't go to him. She didn't need to. Some defeats are better served in solitude. As she walked back down the hill, her phone buzzed. A notification. Court reopens Hafiz Mirza case amid new evidence. Accuser under investigation. She allowed herself a smile, small, tired, but real. It had begun. That night, she stood by her window and watched the jacaranda petals fall once more. But this time, they weren't mourning her past. They were paving the path ahead. The courtroom was packed the day the case was reopened. Journalists squeezed into benches usually left empty, and cameras clicked like distant thunder. Laila sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, her presence calm but unyielding. On the bench before her stood the newly appointed judge, one untainted by the corruption of the past, reviewing documents that laid bare a truth long buried. Behind her, the townspeople whispered, watching her with a mixture of awe and guilt. Laila felt the eyes of 100 ghosts pressing in on her, but she did not flinch. The prosecution, now armed with Laila's collected evidence, painted the timeline of events in grim, vivid detail. The stolen funds, the fabricated witness statements, the manipulated ledgers. Piece by piece, the truth unfurled like a slow, damning tide, and with each revelation, Arab's name sank lower. The defense tried to object, but even they knew the trial was a formality, now a final nail in the coffin of a long-standing lie. Laila did not speak until the second week, when the judge allowed her to take the stand not as a witness to the crime, but as a daughter who had lived in the shadow of its aftermath. She stood slowly, walked to the center, and took the oath with steady hands. The room fell silent. "I was 13 when my father was arrested," she began, her voice unwavering. "I watched him dragged away in the middle of the night, my mother sobbing, my neighbors whispering as if his name had become poison. We were not rich, we were not powerful, but we were honest. And that honesty was shattered by a man who wore wealth like armor and used influence like a sword." She paused, locking eyes with Arab, who sat hunched on the defendant's bench, his once proud shoulders drooped. "I left this town with nothing but a suitcase and shame that did not belong to me. I worked, I studied, and I remembered. Every single day. I remembered the way you laughed in court, the way your lawyers silenced my father, the way the town turned its back on a man who had given them all his trust." She turned to the judge. "I stand here not for revenge. I stand here for the truth. I want his name cleared not for my pride, but for the peace my father was never granted. Let the record show that he was not the thief. He was the victim." Silence. Even the judge looked momentarily moved before composing himself. "Thank you, Dr. Mirza." That evening, the story hit national headlines. "Daughter of wronged man confronts accuser in court, a tale of justice years in the making." Laila's story resonated with the country. She became a symbol not of tragedy, but of unyielding grace, of perseverance, of dignity. Schools invited her to speak. Legal panels asked for her voice. And still, she returned each night to her crumbling childhood home, where she had begun laying new bricks, one wall at a time. Arab, meanwhile, was unraveling publicly. His siblings distanced themselves. His company, what little was left of it, declared bankruptcy. The board removed him from all positions of power. And then came the formal charges: perjury, fraud, falsification of documents, and obstruction of justice. The day he was sentenced, the courtroom once again held its breath. Arab stood in the same spot her father once had, shackled and alone. 10 years, the judge said, without parole. Arab looked out over the courtroom as if hoping someone would save him. But there was no one. Laila did not gloat. She simply stood and left quietly, as if finally laying a ghost to rest. Months passed. Laila used the compensation money from the case to restore her family home completely. She painted the walls the soft blue her mother had once dreamed of. She planted jacaranda trees in the garden, so the blossoms would always return, proof that beauty could bloom after ruin. She opened a legal aid center in the same building where her father had once sold handmade wooden toys. She named it the Mirza Foundation. It offered free services to the wrongfully accused, the voiceless, and the silenced. Within a year, it had handled dozens of cases, each one a small rebellion against injustice. People began to call her the daughter of justice. But for Laila, it wasn't about titles. One day, a boy no older than 10 approached her outside the foundation. He clutched a torn file and stared at her with the same nervous hope she once carried. "My father's in jail," he said. "They said he stole something from the factory, but he didn't. He didn't." Laila knelt, looked into his eyes, and said softly, "Then we'll prove it, just like I did." And in that moment, under the falling blossoms, she knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a torch passed hand to hand, from one wounded soul to another. She had come home not to destroy, but to rebuild something far more powerful than vengeance: truth, healing, and a new legacy. Seasons shifted quietly in the town as time moved forward. The jacaranda trees bloomed again the following spring, and this time, they weren't falling on broken memories, they were falling on rebuilt walls, on new beginnings. Laila stood outside her home, now fully restored, painted in fresh hues of sky blue with ivory trim, its garden lush with herbs and flowers her mother once dreamed of planting. The house no longer whispered stories of disgrace, but stood tall, with pride. Laila often sat in the garden, beneath the shade of the newly planted jacarandas, a book in her lap and purpose in her heart. The Mirza Foundation had grown beyond her imagination. Volunteers from all over the country had joined. Legal students interned under her guidance, and families traveled miles to seek justice. She mentored young women, many of whom had lived in silence too long, giving them the tools to rise just as she had. Every victory, no matter how small, was a piece of her father's honor restored. A year after Arab's sentencing, Laila received a letter handwritten, the script shaky. It was from Begum Rana. Dear Laila, I know I am the last person you wish to hear from. I have watched from afar the good you've done, the peace you have restored, the strength you carry with grace. I do not ask for forgiveness, but I beg you to hear a mother's plea. My son is not the same man who once destroyed your life. Prison has broken him, not just his body, but his soul. I am not asking for his freedom. I know he must serve his sentence. But he is dying, Laila. The doctors say he may not last 6 more months. He keeps asking to see you, to apologize, in person, not because he deserves it, but because you do. If there is even a sliver of space in your heart, please come. Begum Rana. Laila read the letter twice. Her mind tugged in both directions. One part of her, a part that had bled and healed over years, wanted to reject the request. But another part, deeper and stronger, felt that this chapter needed to close fully, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She went. The prison was gray and sterile. The guards knew who she was and treated her with a quiet reverence. They led her to a small visitation room. When Arab was brought in, he looked nothing like the man who had once stood proud in marble towers. He was thinner, his face hollow, eyes sunken. Time had worn him down, and guilt had finished what time had started. He looked at her and didn't speak for a long moment. Then, his voice, a raspy echo of arrogance lost, broke the silence. I see you every night in my dreams. Not angry, just still, unshakable. You haunt me, Laila. She said nothing. I didn't come to beg, he continued. I just wanted to say it, that I'm sorry for what I did to your father, for what I did to you. I was a coward, a selfish, greedy coward. I destroyed lives to protect my lies. She looked at him, this man who had once made her family suffer, and saw not a monster, but a hollow shell. My father, she said slowly, never hated you, even after everything. I asked him once from prison if he wanted revenge. He said, I only want my daughter to live free. And that's exactly what I did. Tears slipped down Arab's face. You took my childhood, she said softly, but you couldn't take who I became. Arab lowered his head, sobbing quietly. I deserved worse. Laila stood. You got exactly what you sowed, and I got exactly what I needed, not your apology, but the truth. I hope you find peace, but don't look for it from me. Find it inside yourself. She turned and walked away, her heart not heavy, but lighter than it had been in years. Forgiveness wasn't hers to give, and she owed him nothing but closure that she had taken for herself. Weeks later, the court issued a formal statement exonerating Hafiz Mirza posthumously. His name was cleared in the official record. Laila held the certificate in her hands like a final blessing. She framed it and hung it in the front hall of her home, right where the light from the window touched it every morning. The jacarandas bloomed once more, scattering purple petals along the town's dusty lanes. And for the first time in years, the town truly embraced them, not as markers of shame, but as the symbols of resilience, beauty, and rebirth. Laila stood beneath one of the largest trees outside her home, arms folded across her chest. Behind her, children from the foundation played, laughed, and ran in the yard, their voices full of light. A young girl tugged her sleeve, eyes wide. Miss Laila, will you tell us a story? Laila smiled, kneeling. I'll tell you the most important one, the story of how truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting golden light over the blooming jacarandas, Laila knew her journey had come full circle, not just as a tale of revenge, but of restoration, legacy, and hope.